Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Grill Nation show with Jason Grill. Thanks for joining us today on KMBC 980 AM or on podcasts. We're on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcast, Stitcher, you name it. We're all over the podcast world. Also appreciate you if you're joining us on the website, grillnationshow.com, or on my social media live stream today on Twitter, LinkedIn, or on my Facebook page. Thank you so much for joining us today for what will be an incredible Grill Nation show. I hope you all had a great holiday weekend and are excited about fall season. We are here at Grill Nation, one, because it means football, and obviously college football started and NFL football. So this is perfect timing for our guest today, who is joining us, Tom Waggoner, who is a renowned sports architect. He now has his own consulting firm. We're going to go through his background and history on today's show. Tom, welcome to the show. How are you today, sir?
I'm good, Jason. Thanks for having me.
So we met at the Tiger Club of Kansas City's golf tournament. I guess it was in August. Yes, it was in August with a great friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, and had just an incredible day. And we connected and we started talking about all of just the amazing things you've done in your career in the sport architecture world, and I'm captivated by it. So, just thought it'd be a great time to have you on. Tell us about yourself. Let's get to know you a little bit. I know you have kind of a very rich history throughout the profession.
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me. I've been out of school, Kansas State University graduate in 1982, so coming up on a 40-year anniversary of being out of college as an architect. Worked here in town. First 6 years of my career, I worked for a couple of firms that were practicing general architecture. And then in 1988, had the opportunity to leave a great job that I had that I enjoyed, and sort of get into sports architecture. But leading up to that, one of the things you and I talked about when we met was I was with a fairly small firm here in town at the time, Gasting and Reese Walker Architects. And during my 4-year stint there, I had this unique opportunity, my wife and I, to actually move to and live in Jamaica for 18 months. I was the on-site architect and oddly enough, the general contractor to renovate what was at the time an abandoned hotel, but it had originally been the Jamaica Playboy Club, and it had been damaged by a hurricane. And so I went down at the fresh age of 27 and worked down there for 18 months. It was an incredible experience. It was longer than I thought it would be, but it really, I think, opened up my mind to more adventurous things in my career, which soon thereafter I got into sports architecture.
Mm-hmm. So was that in Kansas City then? I know you were a K-State grad.
Yes, it was in Kansas City. And soon after I came back, sort of feeling a little bit trapped inside an office, an 8 to 5 office in a sense. The Kansas City sports architecture scene was starting to evolve. It had sort of been launched back in the late 60s unknowingly in some way. But a third firm was emerging here in town. That was Ellerby Beckett, which was a big firm in Minneapolis. They are now called AECOM. But at the time in 1988, there were 2 big sports firms here in Kansas City. One, of course, was HNTB, which had been involved under a different name, with the Truman Sports Complex, which is sort of over my shoulder here. And then there was HOK Sport, which had really exploded on the
I have
scene.
to note, Tom, that your awesome picture behind you, if you're watching on the live stream today, does have the rolling roof, which is
yes,
after going to the Seattle Mariners Stadium, I guess 2 weeks ago, and seeing that thing go over the top in about less than 5 minutes.
Yes.
Wish we had that in Kansas City right now.
Well, it was a great visionary idea then. Again, probably 1967, 1968. And looking back, that it would have been one of the first of its kind actually in the world had it actually occurred, but cost prevented that from happening now 50 years on.
Yeah, very much so. So you were talking about your start, and then you became the principal of 360 Architecture in early 2000s, correct?
Yes. Yes, that was after a 12-year stint working at Ellerby Beckett, which was a great experience. Having a small firm of my own for about 10 or 12 weeks, joining a small firm here in town, and then eventually merging with another small firm here in town, Heinlein Schrock Stearns, to create 360 architecture in 2004.
Mm-hmm. So you did that, and then it's crazy to me just to think about all the different sports architects that have come out of Kansas City. I know then as we go through the rest of your background in this first segment, you went to a place called HOK, correct?
Well, eventually we sold our firm to HOK, but
Okay.
the attraction for me in 1988 of leaving a firm that I'd worked for was probably less about sports, but it was more about the opportunity was dangled in front of me. Come to work at our firm, again, Ellerby Beckett, and you can work on the renovation of Madison Square Garden, which was incredibly appealing to me to be able to have the opportunity to do that. I wasn't quite sure what I was getting into, but it turned out to be a 3-year nonstop, almost every week in New York City, which was incredibly healthy for me to experience that place and that city and have it be a sports project. And in a sense, from that point on, I never left this part of the business.
What was that like? Just how old were you when you did that?
I was 29 when I decided to go and do that. And I think a lot of architects, maybe more so in the Midwest, I don't know so much now, but I think there's always a desire to do something sort of outside the lines of what you're used to. And, having grown up in Wichita and gone to school at K-State, and the project in Jamaica opened my eyes to a whole new world. And I had actually, while in college, spent 8 months out in Connecticut on a formal internship through Kansas State. And that gave me a chance to live in a different part of the country. That was very exciting, with so many big cities nearby that I could go see and explore on weekends. And New York was certainly one that opened a lot of doors for me in terms of, stepping sort of off the sidelines and onto the field in some way for me as a young architect and growing in the profession and in life.
What was the reaction? And we got about a minute left. We're going to talk all about Tom's experience, some of the projects he's worked on, why sports architecture, the book that he's writing, and will be coming out very soon about this industry and kind of how Kansas City is a leader in it, and kind of the background and why. What was that experience like when you came from Kansas City to New York? When you're working on Madison Square Garden, what was the general reception at that time as Kansas City?
Well, it was Kansas City already had a reputation at that point of being a hub for sports architecture. And so we came into town with, some experience and certainly some background in the business. And for me, I think more than anything, it was you really needed to apply common sense. And I sort of grown that ability in Jamaica because there were no rules working in Jamaica in a lot of ways. And it's sort of day to day. And even as sophisticated as a city as New York is, you really got to fall back on common sense and your ability to, shuck and jive along the way to deal with the things that are thrown at you.
Mm-hmm. I've walked by Madison Square Garden probably about 30 times when I've been in New York City, probably 10 times at this point. I've never been in it. I've been in like the walkways and the train station and all that, but I've not been to a sporting event. So now I have to go now that you worked on it. Tom Waggoner is our guest. Going to have a great show today. Thank you for listening to the Grill Nation show. We will be right back after the break. Okay. Tom, we are saving our first segment and on the live stream going to number 2, which is 11 minutes and 40 seconds.
Okay.
We're going to start off on sports architecture and the why and why you got into this and why it's so an incredible industry to be in, and kind of go from there on some of the other things that I have pinged up here.
Okay.
So what year was that they renovated Madison Square Garden?
It occurred from 1988 to 1991, and then probably in the mid to late, maybe 2005, 2008, it went through a nearly $1 billion second renovation, which was amazing. It was actually designed by, I think it was some Canadian architects that were involved, and Turner Construction was the builder. But a building like that gets so much wear and tear, and the bar is set so high with newer arenas from technology, access, all sorts of things, space. There was nowhere to grow Madison Square Garden in a lot of ways. But the interesting part is the event floor, where the hockey and basketball court sits, is actually on the 5th floor of that building that you've walked by many times.
Wow. Okay.
So access into the building is very difficult for trucks and load in and concerts and just everything. I mean, it's a truly amazing 12-story building.
Very much so. Okay, we are getting ready to go here on number 2. So in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Grill Nation show with Jason Grill. Thank you for listening today or watching us. If you're joining us on the radio, on podcast, or on live stream, you connect with me on social media. I'm on Twitter at Jason Grill and at Grill Nation Show. Also, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Jason Grill. Thank you again for connecting with me, whether it's through the Grill Nation show or on a consulting project or whatever I do, as well as this show. I guess you would say as far as media relations, government affairs, and on consulting work. Tom Waggoner is our guest. Tom is he's the owner of a consulting firm now, his own, but has a very rich history in sports architecture, has worked at the who's who of sports architecture firm. He's had his own sports architecture firm throughout the years, and he's just a great story. Let's start with Tom. Let's start with kind of the why. So, what drew you to this industry, and kind of, why did you kind of stay engaged in it for all of these years?
Yeah. So the funny part about my attraction to work in New York, and certainly as we talked about earlier, and particularly working on Madison Square Garden. Growing up in Wichita, Kansas, for some reason, and I don't know why, other than as a young kid, I went to New York on a family trip. I was a New York Knicks fan. And so I was always fascinated. Every Sunday afternoon, it seems like, after returning home from church, the Knicks were on against the Celtics, it seems like. And I sort of became a New York Knicks fan. And so the idea of eventually going to see Madison Square Garden, which I'd never been in, was always, sort of a dream as a young kid. And then when the idea of combining my, at the time, evolving and profession as an architect, to actually go there and work on a building that I dreamt about. I can still remember walking in there the first time and, into the seating bowl from one of the portals. It's like, wow, I'm actually here and I'm working on this building. So that was a real eye-opening experience for me, and both personal and then professional. And I think soon thereafter, my next project that followed that, for the most part, after 3 years of working on Madison Square Garden, the firm I was working with, L.B. Beckett, was for the most part handed the renovation of Notre Dame's football stadium. And I was redirected by my boss at the time I think I was working on the Philadelphia 76ers arena at that point. As a technical architect, my boss called me in one day and said, you're going to South Bend, Indiana tomorrow to work on, a study to, expand Notre Dame's football stadium. And once that occurred, which was a 5-year project for me, it was like the golden key in some ways to opening doors for college sports, and especially football. And it was just an attraction I just couldn't pull myself away from. It was incredibly exciting. And it just kept going and going. And it's still, for me, it's been the last almost 30 years just in college sports.
So, wow. So I didn't know. So the Notre Dame, when did that stadium renovation? Was that on the expansion, or did you do something else with that?
No, it was the expansion. So I started working on that as part of a team at L.B. Beckett in 1991. And it was to test the waters of just renovating the building. This was the idea of the administration at Notre Dame, the athletic department. The following year, they actually used that as a way to actually make the project an expansion. Little did we know as architects, but just renovating the building was nearly $25 million in the early 90s. They used that as a jumping off point then to sell the administration and the alumni on actually expanding the stadium. And creating a revenue stream by adding 20,000 seats and a press box that only had a handful of suites, actually. So that was a $50 million project. Mm-hmm. And that project went from pretty much 1992 until it opened. It was never fully closed in 1997. What's interesting, about 10 years ago, they actually expanded it again to the tune of $400 million. The first expansion was about $55 million. And in that expansion, which was performed by, at the time, my firm, 360 Architecture / HOK. I was not involved in this next renovation, but the firm was. Expansion is what it was. And it added a whole cadre of different types of premium seating, as well as classroom space, and their student rec center. It's a massive project in which they totally changed the outside of the stadium and created premium seats.
Yeah, I've been there many, not many times. Visited two or three times. Last time was for Michigan Notre Dame. I think it was opening weekend.
Yeah.
Great campus. Just a lifelong dream of mine to go to college there, law school. I didn't do it, but maybe I'll have a child one day. They can go to Notre Dame.
Right.
That'd be nice. Tom Waggoner is with us. So that was your big break, essentially.
It was
college sports.
It really was. And during that time of putting the design together and eventually waiting for the construction to finish, I also developed almost by chance a relationship that is alive and well today after almost 27 years, and that's with the University of Missouri Athletic Department. And that occurred in 1995 when one of my partners and I at Ellerbe Beckett went over and interviewed for a stadium renovation at Memorial Stadium. And that has snowballed into a literally 25-year plus relationship of now, I think, 5 athletic directors, in which I've only had one 5-month break in that 26 years. And it's an incredible story for me in my career to be working just down the road at a school that I didn't go to. It does not have an architecture program, but I've had such a rich history of one school, and it's really University of Missouri.
Yeah, that's a good point there. So, Tom, what sports architecture? Not every college has that program.
Right. That's right.
But is it? You think it's 50% of like the major colleges in the Power Five, or is it less than that?
Oh, it's probably 50% plus.
Okay.
And what's interesting when I've worked around the country at colleges, as well as any other sports architect here in town, regardless of where they call home in terms of the firm they work for. Those schools pretty much expect you to, team with a local architect who probably went to school there, who probably is at the country club, has tickets, is a supporter, and knows the lay of the land. And that's, for me personally, that's been a rich experience too, is working and becoming ingrained with a local architect who knows a lot about the institution. They're probably from that area. A good example is I've worked for 10 or 12 years, or I did, with Auburn University. Befriended an architect who went there, played football there. He's a few years younger than me. We've become good friends. He played with Bo Jackson, and he was a walk-on center. And he's got a great story. And we've teamed together, and I've learned a lot about his world, his environment, which is, his whole career and his, upbringing was in Alabama. And it was really a fun experience to get to know his world and see it through his eyes, but also team up as architects.
Mm-hmm. Tom Waggoner is with us. You're the owner at your own design and consulting firm now, but have served many years, close to 30 years in the sports architecture room. You mentioned growing your sports architecture practice in Auburn and Mizzou, and is that just a reputational thing, or are you going to conferences during all these times? Are you networking with outreach to universities? Is there RFPs? How did you really kind of grow it and become such a renowned person in the industry?
Well, it's probably similar to a lot of folks that would be considered my competitors through the years, and that is do a good job and they'll invite you back. Also, be willing to earn your stripes, whether it's doing a master plan or re-roofing a building. I've always said that, you can't come in and expect to be one of the starting 5 in a sense. You got to sort of join the team, practice and earn your way onto that starting, onto the court or on the field. And the other thing is that it was never really planned, but as I look back over, almost 34 years in sports and most of it college sports, I've literally just followed. And again, I'm not unique, I don't think, in this regard. I followed athletic directors around. When I was a young architect, a lot of the people I worked with on projects in athletic departments were the number 3 or 4 person, maybe 5 person. Well, then they changed jobs, and I would follow them, whether they became the athletic director or moved up a slot or two. And that just propagated for me and others. And there's, I have a few clients that I've literally had for 30 years at 4 or 5 different schools. They become good friends. We've watched our kids grow up. We actually get together socially. We've traveled together. And when I go to their houses or work on their projects, I usually stay at their house. We become that good of friends. So that's been a real fun experience, is to really see their world and the things they do through their eyes.
Speaking of being engaged or staying in a house, you spent time on an aircraft carrier. Tell us about that experience and why you did that.
Yeah. So about 20 some years ago, one of my former partners, who now is an executive with J.E. Dunn Construction, a man named Randy Bradar, and the current design principal at HOK, Bill Johnson, the three of us pursued a renovation of the Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium out in Annapolis, Maryland. We had sort of been tipped off that it was going to happen. And so we went out to meet with these folks and eventually ended up in an interview and won this job to renovate the stadium. And our winning idea when we interviewed it was crazy, and I remember the drawings like it was yesterday, was to literally cut off the front of a battleship and stick it in the end zone so it protruded out into almost the back of the end zone, and it could be used as premium seating. And these not only civilian folks within athletics, Naval Academy Athletic Association, it's actually called, as well as some of the military folks, it just made their head spin. They couldn't believe we had this wacky idea. And Jack Lingle was the athletic director at the time, and he said, "These are the guys I want to hire." And so part of the training Jack wanted us to go through was to send 2 of us out onto an active aircraft carrier off the coast of Virginia. We flew out, 2 of us flew out, Randy Bradar and I flew out, landed on the tailhook, and spent 2 days on the Theodore Roosevelt. And it was an unbelievable experience of doing that, to see everything sort of behind the scenes, up and down through the innards of the ship, and to be around 5,500 sailors whose average age was maybe 22 years old. This was right before 9/11. It was June of 2001, and it was a government program we were special because Jack got us out there within about 45 days because he was the athletic director. But yeah, we spent 2 days out there, and it's just about as cool as anything I've ever been able to do.
Very cool. Tom Waggoner is with us. We'll be right back with more of the Grill Nation show after the break. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll talk to you soon. We'll be right back. So, Tom, on the aircraft carrier idea, so I think that sounds cool. What happened? It didn't happen, huh?
Well, no, not putting the ship out there. But I did. Jack Lingle is the guy who was We Are Marshall.
Mm-hmm.
If you've seen that movie, Jack was the coach that went to Marshall, and eventually Matthew McConaughey played him in the movie. Jack became a friend. I stay in touch with Jack. He's mid-80s. But I ended up working then with Chet Gladchuk, who first day on the job, believe it or not, was the first football game after 9/11. He had come from the University of Houston, and they played Boston College. I was out on the press box when that first game occurred. It was the only academy that had a home game that Saturday. I think they canceled everything the first Saturday and Sunday, pro football college. And then the following Saturday, 10 days after 9/11, I was out in that press box. It was kind of eerie. They didn't know what was going to happen. They had Marines on everywhere with high-powered rifles. They had metal detectors, and
wow,
here we go. But it was a really cool experience working on that stadium because it really is treated as a memorial.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Pretty sure I've driven by it before.
Yeah.
Never been in it.
What's interesting is it's not on their campus, which is called the Yard. So the athletic department has some freedom that they wouldn't have with policies and procedures had it been in the heart of campus, but it happens to be 2 or 3 blocks away, which is kind of cool because the Corps of Cadets, I think they're called midshipmen. Maybe that's Army. They actually march over there from campus.
Just waiting on Darren to tell us we're good to go on our 3rd segment here. Go from there. So You've probably been to a lot of stadiums in your life. I can't even imagine. We lost Darren, so he's got to reconnect. So we'll just keep talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what? I mean, how many college football stadiums do you think you've been to at this point, Tom?
I've probably been to 45 or 50, not having necessarily. I remember when I first started working on SMU's new stadium, which opened in 2000. In fact, they played KU opening game. I actually traveled out to Boston College to look at a bleacher system that hadn't been used at a scale before. So I went out there just literally to tour the building, got caught in a snowstorm in early April. It was kind of weird, and ended up spending a couple of days in Boston. But there was a fair amount of that goes on. When I started at Mizzou, Jim Sturk and I and a few others flew out to University of Washington to look at Husky Stadium, which I had worked on, mainly the end zone piece. And then we stopped at Washington State, where he had been, to look at everything that had occurred since he had moved on to, I think, San Diego. So there's a lot of those sort of impromptu stops along the way to tour facilities, and you learn something. You know, you're not there to, I guess you're there to, if you could, steal ideas, but it's there. It's to see how people are treating recruiting anymore. That's what's really amazing. It's a great place to compete, but right now it's recruiting, and then more recruiting.
Yeah. The Washington Husky Stadium that you worked on, I flew over that, of course, last couple of weeks ago. What an amazing location.
Yeah. Well, you know what we did? We tore down old Husky Stadium, which is actually a very old stadium, early 20s, I think, which is very old for a stadium that's on the West Coast, Northwest. So we tore it down, but we left one section of the stadium because it helped us with some of the funding. It was a $250 million building. We lowered the field, moved the track, but we kept one side of the stands and then sort of recreated the other. And the signature, obviously, are those big roofs. But, you know, you get up in that stadium and you look out on the lake, and it's about as cool a setting as you'll find that I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that was a 5-year project for us. It was complicated. There were a lot of regulations, a lot of environmental things that, you know, aren't really here yet in the Midwest, at least at the time.
What year was that?
I think we finished that stadium about 7 years ago. Yep.
Okay. Just give me a second, Aries.
Sure.
I'm having problems connecting. But what we can do if we don't get him back is we'll just, oh, here he is. We will, I can just record the audio off this service. Then we can edit it from there. But we're good to go. There he is. Okay. Segment 3 of the Grill Nation show for this week. Darren is back, producer. We're going to start rolling here in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Grill Nation show with Jason Grill. I appreciate you joining us today. As always, you can listen to all of our shows on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, KMBZ 980 AM. We're also on YouTube at Grill Nation Show with Jason Grill. Great show so far today with Tom Waggoner. Tom is the very established, renowned sports architect who actually lives here in Kansas City in the region. Has worked on, multitudes of projects, both in college athletics and in pro sports. Tom, you talked about Mizzou and how you got engaged with Mizzou. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because you said you've been with 5 athletic directors at this point.
Yeah.
What do you think about, I mean, obviously you're very proud of what's happened because you've worked on it, but going forward and now, like, where is Mizzou at with its athletic facilities?
Well, yeah, I just actually had a conversation with Tim Hickman this morning, who's the senior associate athletic director, and he and I are preparing to provide an overview for their new athletic director here in a few weeks about the history of the facilities. And one of the things he and I talked about is this are the sports that are in really good shape and the ones that aren't. And it's fairly typical, I think, on most college campuses, and especially working in, as many of us in Kansas City do, working in these Power 5 conferences. Football and basketball are in great shape. I was just involved working with HOK as a consultant. We're in the process of finishing up new locker rooms at Mizzou Arena. Well, that building opened in 2004. It really hadn't been touched. It was in great shape when it was built. Jay Dunn built the building. And we actually just did a major renovation where we actually flipped the men's and women's locker rooms, oddly enough, demoed both of them and rebuilt them. And they're literally, putting the finishing touches on this week. But those sports, as well as football, and maybe especially football, are in really good shape. Softball's in good shape over there. Baseball, I think, has some challenges. Tennis, track and field, the facilities are really good. But when you size them up against the SEC or even the Big 12 that they left, 10 plus years ago, the arms race has been so unbelievable. Not only from a fan standpoint, but a recruiting standpoint, that the training facilities, the academic components, all those sort of things, and each leader that comes in, and I can probably reflect most on Mizzou, because when I started there in 1995 with Joe Castiglione as the athletic director, he had just completed, working with HOK Sport, now Populous, their first master plan for athletics, and right away started to execute these projects, starting with football. And eventually, it took 10 years to get a new arena, but a new arena is not an easy project to pull off for a lot of reasons. But there are certainly areas that need some sort of foundations put on them at Mizzou. But Mike Alden, as soon as they joined the SEC, we executed 6 projects, which included golf and tennis and certainly, basketball and football, but started right away really improving. And by the time Mike left, I think every sport had been touched. Well, now it's time to refresh those, and it's time to up the game, especially in the SEC. And like I said, it's not only the competition, but it's being able to recruit the best student athletes and coaches and administrators. And Mizzou's starting anew in a lot of ways, and it's really exciting to see what's going to occur over there.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting.
Yeah.
You mentioned you worked at Auburn. I've never been down there, but I'm assuming they have good facilities for football.
Well, yes. Yeah, they do. But what is interesting is I was working on a recruiting facility for Jay Jacobs before Jay sort of left and went to Florida as a number 2. We were also in my office, we were working on a similar recruiting facility for Georgia. And I called Jay one day and I said, "Look, Jay, I need to be honest with you. There's going to be an announcement tomorrow that Georgia is announcing an end zone project of their own." And he said, "I appreciate hearing that." And I think he probably already knew, but I wanted him to have a heads up. And he said, just tell me ours is going to be better. And I said, "You know what? I know ours is going to be better." So after I hung up, I went down the hall to my partner. I said, what's your budget? He said, $60 million. And I said, "Oh my God, ours is 28. But we have to make do with what you have to, you have." And so, it's.
You've seen a lot, man. Tom, you have seen a lot. I'm envious of you seeing all these places, man. I can't wait to I could talk to you for years about this stuff. But I want to get to your book. Tell us about your book and that you've been working on and writing, because I know it's been a labor of love and really working hard on this. In addition to all your consulting work you do, what's it all about, and when can we read it?
Yeah. So I hope to have it out by 1st of November. I'm working with a local editor, David Smale, who's been involved in 20 plus books. Many are about sports. But I really had this passion to write a book ever since I was in college, oddly enough. And here I am 40 years out, and it's going to happen. When I started my career out of college, I was working at H&TB. And at the time, there were sports architects there who eventually left while I was there and started HOK Sport in 1983. I happened to be working with that group on a convention center project, which fell into sort of the sports group hands based on how the firm was put together. But I never really had a desire to run off and get involved in sports. But as I started to look back about 5 years ago, what I realized was there didn't seem to be, and having dozens of clients ask, why Kansas City, why Kansas City, why are all you sports architects? And everybody in this business that's in Kansas City gets this question from people on airplanes or their neighbors or whatever. So I started looking 5 years ago, and I realized there's bits and pieces about this story, but there wasn't that I could find a complete story. So I said, I'm going to commit myself to this. I actually went to working 4 days a week about 4 years ago. And every Friday I would be down at the Kansas City Public Library going through their special collections, trying to learn more about it. It's turned out to be a lot different than I thought in some ways. And it's been very, very exciting to go through and do this. The other thing was, anytime there was an article in the paper or Sports Business Journal, they mentioned the big firms, the HNTBs, the Populous, the AECOMs, the 360s, but they didn't talk about the fact that there are a dozen, maybe 2 dozen smaller firms in Kansas City and elsewhere that compete in this business, and they never get recognition. So I've made it a point to try to figure out who all these firms are, talk to as many of the owners as I can. Most are still working in their 60s. They can't get away from it any more than I could. And to actually make them a part of the story, along with these big 4 firms. And also talk to people in Dallas and New York and LA that left Kansas City and started their own things. It's really a truly amazing story, not only locally, but for sort of coast to coast.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, Tom, I mean, what do you think Kansas City should be doing? I mean, should we be advertising, marketing our sports design leadership more? And if so, how? Like, do we do enough to do this? Because I know it's not like marketing country music in Nashville,
Right.
Austin, the tech company. I was out in Charlotte this week talking about their financial industry. They've really marketed that. They've got more millennials than you can believe, talent. Like, what could we be doing? Could we be doing anything more?
You know, it's a really great question. I think, Jason, I think the business in some ways speaks for itself. It is so well known to so many people that are in this industry. If you're in the know on the ownership side, whether it's an athletic director or campus architect, or certainly a professional sports team owner, you're aware of the Kansas City critical mass of architects. And so the business itself does advertise itself, and it's through great work, both design wise, technical wise, follow through wise, and it really is something that if you're in the industry, you know that. And maybe my book will help sort of advertise it in some ways. It is a local story, I feel. I don't really see it as a national story, but I think the quality of the buildings and the quality of the people that have grown, whether you're brand new in the business working for one of these firms or you've been doing it for 40 years, and there's many of us that have been doing it for 40 plus years, I think the business and the quality of the places really advertises it. Could you take it to a higher level? I know at one point when Kevin Gray was president of the Sports Commission, he wanted to create a museum of sports architecture. And I can remember talking to Kevin, as did other sports architects. In my opinion, I remember telling Kevin, I don't think we could ever get along well enough to create something together. And he actually went out and had a non-sports firm sort of develop some ideas. It was going to be, I think, in the lower level of the municipal auditorium, but it never came to fruition. It was going to take time and money away from everybody doing what was already a full-time plus job, and that is servicing clients and projects all over the country. We're all on airplanes all the time. So I think the word is out there in a lot of ways. I hope that my book helps let Kansas City know what an unbelievable treasure and celebration we have here that has been here for many years and will hopefully stay here for many years, although the footprint is bigger now. But I think I just want people to appreciate what's gone on through, and it's pumped hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into our economy for 50 years now in terms of the fees for architects and engineers and contractors.
Mm-hmm. Tom Waggoner is with us. Tom, we got a minute left in segment 3. Talk about kind of juggling all these clients at one time. How many can a real sports architect really handle when they're doing stadium projects?
Yeah.
We'll
So
see.
my partners and I, when we owned 360 Architectures, we were growing it from about 90 people when we put two firms together to 180 within probably about 5 years. We were limited by the number of projects each of us could handle, and a few of our other sort of junior partners. And we always felt 6 to 8 was probably about the number we could do. And you sort of do the math and you say, okay, that's going to be that 100 and whatever people in your firm. And I think that was back then when we had to go everywhere and be at every meeting physically. So it was very challenging to run a business and provide good service to our clients. Hopefully not get sued because of technical issues, and keep it going. And all the while, have families and have personal lives. So, maybe it's going to change. I hope it does change so that the travel goes down for the current generation of architects working in the business.
Very interesting stuff. You're listening to the Grill Nation show with Jason Grill. We'll be right back. Thanks for joining us today. Okay, Tom, final segment. I'm taping all of this myself, and this will be a shorter segment of 9 minutes and 8 seconds, give or take.
Okay.
And we'll start here in a few seconds. Let me take a sip of water. And
okay. We need to schedule some time at Indian Hills together.
That'd be nice. That'd be nice. I played Chambers Bay.
Oh, wow.
2 weekends ago.
Yeah.
Can't wait to tell you about that. Talking about architecture, how they built that is just quite an amazing feat. Okay. It's like we lost Tom. Well, everyone, I hope you're doing well. We're waiting for Tom to jump back on here on the there he is.
Got me?
Yeah, we got you. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Everybody's working today, Tom, after a holiday. Hold on one second here. Okay. We will begin here in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Grill Nation show with Jason Grill. I appreciate you joining us for our last segment today with Tom Waggoner, who's a design consultant, a renowned sports architect, writing a great book that'll be out here in November, hopefully, on the history and all the connections with KC sports architecture throughout this country. Tom, we have our best for last segment here. I want to start with some of the favorite stadiums you've been to or worked on in college sports and in the pros. Share us some of your favorite stadiums. Maybe not that you worked on, but some of just your favorite stadiums across the landscape, either or. If you worked on.
Yeah. So, I have great memories. And one of the things, there's a great book that came out a few years ago by a writer in New York named Paul Goldberger, who's an architectural critic, and it's called Ballpark. Simply that. It's a great overview of the history of Populus's work because they've designed so many ballparks. And he talks about memories. And I really hadn't thought about that. Not only the games, but it's the memories you still have. I have great memories of going to the old Busch Stadium with my dad every summer. Our family's originally from Illinois. All my uncles and cousins, all the boys and the dads would all go and go to Busch Stadium, and it would they'd stop at a tavern on the way that they used to go to is when they grew up in Illinois, and so I have great memories of that place. I can remember going to see Bob Gibson against Juan Marichal of the Giants, and Willie Mays and Lou Brock. And that's a great memory for me. Obviously, working on places like Notre Dame. I can remember a great game going at Matt Court at Oregon before they replaced that with the current Oregon Arena that Phil Knight's, I think it's named after Phil Knight's son. Places like that. Certainly places like Duke and North Carolina. I've worked at both of those. Interesting enough, two great stadiums. It's hard to really pick a place, so to favor one client or the other. But I worked on a stadium at Elon University. Randy Brader and I designed their small football stadium, 8,000 seats, almost 20 years ago. Well, my oldest daughter eventually went to Elon on a college soccer scholarship and played there. And I got to see her score a goal there. That was incredibly exciting to see that. Maybe 10 years ago. She's 31 now. And my youngest daughter is an engineer, went to K-State. And she and I have spent the last 2+ years working together on a team at K-State on this new South End Zone project, which will be dedicated this weekend. So, having those memories of sports with different experiences with my 2 daughters, my only 2 children, has just been an incredible sort of fourth chapter, moving into overtime in my career of sports and celebrating that with the 2 of them in different ways.
What is your best advice, Tom, that you've learned throughout your journey that has really helped you in your career?
Yeah. I remember early on when I was one of about 10 or 15 people working at Ellerbe Beckett, and we literally were working off of carpenter-built drawing tables down on Southwest Boulevard, or Southwest Traffic Way, in an office building. One of the leaders of the office had come back from a trip, and we would get together, those of us that traveled, and tell travel stories because it was a big deal. Part of us were in New York and Boston and Phoenix, all working on arena projects. And we'd sit around, somebody would get a case of beer, and we'd just tell stories. And I remember one of the leaders saying, something I want you guys to hear, and hear me now. Don't ever badmouth your competition, ever, but certainly don't do it to somebody you don't know. He had been sort of rooted out in a ways. And he admitted this, that he'd called one of our competing architects a cocktail architect. And he didn't realize he was talking to a client who was close friends. Well, that certainly got back to that architect. And this leader that we had said, don't ever, this business is too small. And at the time it was tiny. The business was very tight back then. It was, in a sense, the big 3 existed at that point, and that was 5 years into this competition. And now it's, that part of the whole thing is 40 years deep. And I know I took that to heart then, and it's kind of helped me in some ways, I think, have access to a lot of architects to talk to about my book and hear their experience, because it's not easy to sort of stay on the positive side of this when it's such a competitive business. Everywhere you go, there's somebody from Kansas City that's either interviewed right before you or they're going to follow you in the door. So
yeah,
it's a small business.
That's true. You've traveled all over the United States. You've been in a lot of these different places. Why do you love Kansas City, and what's your favorite thing about it?
Well, it's this business is all here. It's centrally located, which in a lot of ways you think can make it easy to travel. I think with our new airport, it will make it easier to be able to do that. It's been fun for me having, grown up in Wichita, and I knew in college I wanted to live in Kansas City because I got exposed to it through some projects, some fictitious design studio projects. And it was just, wow, this is a big city. This is fun. They have pro sports. And it's been really fun now for 40 years to see the city evolve, especially the downtown area, without a doubt, and the crossroads. And it's been fun to sort of see it through the eyes of my 2 daughters, who both live here. They went away to college, they came back, and it's fun to experience it with them and their spouses, their husbands, in a different light, to sort of see what it is they like about it, and see if my wife and I are cool enough to sort of hang with them as they experience it.
I want to ask you another question on that note of one thing you'd like to see us do or have that we don't currently have here in Kansas City.
Well, I think what's been interesting, and I don't think I understood the explosion of Major League Soccer stadiums until I started doing some by the numbers as a part of my book and looking at the unbelievable number of soccer stadiums that have happened. I remember going out to Home Depot Center when it was the first. Well, it's sort of the second soccer stadium. Columbus Crew, I think, was the first. But going out and seeing a big league soccer stadium, almost 28,000, it's like, wow, this is really incredible to see a stadium this small that is so intimate and so active, a big game for the Galaxy. But to see the explosion of those sort of stadiums, now with women's soccer, I hope that the team, the women's professional team, can eventually have their own venue, probably at a different scale. I think it's United Soccer League has opened a series of to the men's teams, but they're not the MLS, but they're in a little lower division with hopes of getting to be at the MLS, whether it's teams or cities. And those teams are building their own stadiums now, and that's exciting to see that. And that's sort of the missing piece for us here in town now with another professional sports team.
That's true. I can't imagine going to sporting events with you because you just notice everything. I would imagine.
Well, I don't pay attention. That's the funny part. I think most architects would say this, whether it's their building or somebody else's. It's hard to kind of focus on the game because there's so many things to see and so many things to watch in terms of fan reaction.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't agree more. We got a minute left, Tom. What really excites you about the future of sports architecture and stadiums moving forward?
Well, I think it's really exciting. I haven't personally. I've done a little bit of research for the master planning work I've done at Kansas State, looking at some of their facilities. Is the esports that's emerging. Both Populous and HOK here in town have been involved in not only adjusting arenas, existing arenas, or even planning for in new arenas, but also there's small buildings being designed and built specific to this, and it creates a whole new type of quote unquote competitor, less on the athletic side, more on the intellectual side, and the growth of that is just unbelievable if you read about it. And it's a worldwide footprint that anybody can watch and participate. I assume bet on these things, compete and win money just about anywhere from home or sitting inside a small venue as a fan.
Tom Waggoner, he is the great renowned sports architect here living in Kansas City. Been around the business for quite some time. He's coming out with a new book, and it's going to be out in November. Just a fascinating guest here on Grill Nation show. Very lucky to have him on the show. Excited to kind of to stay in touch, Tom, and congrats on all your success and everything you've built over the last 30 to 35 years.
Thanks so much, Jason. I really appreciate getting to know you and being on your show today.
Appreciate it. Thank you to the listeners for joining us today on the Grill Nation show. We will see you again next week. Take care and have a great day. Okay, so now
wow, that was fun.
That was fun. We'll do it again sometime. We'll tape your sneak peek here, which will still be on the live broadcast. Is there a specific question that I asked or something else you wanted to get to that we can share on social media that will be under 2 minutes and 15 seconds? Essentially, I was going to ask you that last question, but is there anything else maybe about the book or?
Yeah, I think I watched at least the lead in the sort of 2 minute sneak peek, probably 30 of your shows this weekend. Yeah. And obviously there's a lot about entrepreneurship and careers and what do you learn. I think a great question, and it was, I think in your questions you sent me is, the best advice you can give. I talked about the best advice I received. And I think I've responded to that question several times, and I think it's a simple word, and it's been a big part of my career. It's trust.
So we'll do that. I'll ask you the question here.
Okay.
In a second. Best advice you can give someone. Is that cool?
Yeah. Cool.
Okay. Okay. So we're gonna go here in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. It's Jason Grill, host of the Grill Nation show. Thanks for joining us for this one question sneak peek with renowned sports architect Tom Waggoner. Tom, I have one question for you. We're going to have an awesome show this week. We're going to talk all about your journey, some of the great projects you worked on, a lot of good business advice. Just going to be a fabulous show here on the Grill Nation show this week. My one question for you now is, what is the best advice you can give someone?
Well, I think it's very reflective of what I've learned in my career, and that is developing trust. Certainly with clients, sort of keep the lights on in a lot of ways, and your employees. But I've worked with so many clients who have hired me. Even to this day, I'm being, as a consultant, as a one-person consulting firm, I'm being hired partly for my expertise, and certainly even in areas that I've never really worked in. For instance, office buildings at times or houses. And it really comes down to that person trusting me. It's usually somebody that you know, but earning that trust. And I look back one time recently, actually, at the number of designers that I've brought into. I'm more of a management and business development client person. Looking back over 27 years working at the University of Missouri, what's amazing to me is I probably had 16 or 18 different designers. And when I pointed out to one of my clients at Missouri, they couldn't believe it'd been that many. I was the common thread. And the common thread was they trusted me to bring the right people, do the right thing, and deliver as I promised. And it takes a long time to earn that. I think you can destroy it in minutes and not seconds. And I think that you can't put enough value on that in your work and personal life both.
Very good information from Tom. Tom Waggoner is our guest on the Grill Nation show this week. He has worked on Notre Dame Stadium, Madison Square Garden, all the Mizzou facilities, in Washington. I mean, the list, Auburn, the list goes on and on. We're going to get into all this here. It's going to be a fascinating Grill Nation show. Thank you for joining us today for this one question sneak peek. Okay, Tom, hold on one second.